In the previous episode, when Prince finally met his sister, they were both about to have some interesting conversations. So, when Tilly asks her brother who he really is, he just replies that he's her brother in flesh, the fourth Prince of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. He admits that he's changed a lot but is willing to explain everything slowly, starting from the moment he saved the witches. Once Prince is done explaining everything, Tilly quickly starts piecing things together in her mind. She thinks to herself that the witch named Anna must have triggered something in Roland, making him see through the church's evil deception. She is convinced that ever since Garcia made assassination attempts on him, he finally realized the power of royal families, and decided to change for the better if he wanted to win the crown. As she thinks this through, she finishes her tea, and Roland pours her some more. Tilly reflects that while it sounds a bit dramatic, it's still an explanation. However, she's still trying to wrap her head around the foreign knowledge he now possesses, like inventions such as the steam engine and rifles. She finally asks him outright if the reason behind his alien knowledge is that he suddenly gained a lot of memories. The prince agrees without a doubt, saying that after he dodged Garcia's attempt to kill her, the memories appeared when he woke up. If meeting with Anna was the start, then those memories would be the catalyst for his desire for change. Tilly then reflects once again, and remembers that Sylvie confirmed there aren't witches who can substitute or control others, and Roland Wimbledon is indeed the prince they knew. Plus, he's not a stranger to the Stone of Divine Punishment, and he always has knights to protect him, so the chances of a witch controlling him are minuscule. The Royal Library and scholars never mentioned anything about steam or snow powder, so she believes that his strange knowledge seems closely related to his unusual experiences. She then questions him once again, asking him how can he prove that he is Roland Wimbledon and all this knowledge is just from awoken memories. The prince grows quiet for a moment, then explains that he still remembers everything, and his own memories shape his conscience. If a witch were disguising herself as someone else, she wouldn't have that person's memories. Even though he has these new memories, he has no idea where they came from. He adds that he still remembers how she cried when he pushed her onto broken glass, and that's his proof. He also remembers that he never apologized for it, and hopes it's not too late for that. Tilly is at a loss for words, and finds it all unbelievable. The prince then reveals that in this world, everything looks surprising when you see them or experience them for the first time. He points out how he never expected his sister would be able to hide her witch awakening from everyone in the castle. But then again, he reminds her that this winter is going to be a long one, so they have a lot of time to talk about everything. Tilly agrees and says that she'll be under his care for the next few months. After his sister's intense questions, the prince finally relaxes and reflects that he's glad all the Slumber Island witches returned to the castle after their tour to the town, which gave him reason to end that heavy conversation. It's really stressful to lie to someone's face when they're smart, especially while trying to maintain an honest expression. Just then, Nightingale pops up and asks if he feels strange witnessing his sister as a witch. The prince says he was just pressured with all of her questioning, and that's all. Nightingale mentions that she thought it would be a touching reunion since he met his sister after a long time. The prince then points out that he doesn't have a good relationship with her. He often bullied her in the castle, and they were pretty much strangers as they grew older, so it's quite surprising she even came here to meet him. She then leans in closer and reminds him how he told her to go outside, even though he never meets any other witches alone, which makes Nightingale believe that he must trust his sister. My guy just turns his head away with a sheepish look on his face. The fact that he sent the Nightingale outside was because he did not want her to detect his lies. He might have told her to his sister. And right now, he is also trying his best to not make eye contact and to avoid speaking any lies. He simply tells her that she will understand someday. But Nightingale just keeps pressing, inching closer and asking him if he'll tell her everything. The prince stutters in response, and she takes it as a positive sign, deciding to wait for the day when he finally tells the truth. Later, we see Lightning and Maggie calling everyone into the dining hall, where a spread of delicious food has been laid out. All the witches gather in, with Wendy personally escorting Princess Tilly to the dining room. The new witches are amazed at how much grander the food looks compared to usual. Even Ash can't help but smirk, feeling proud of Bordertown's hospitality. Her smirk is just to tease her blonde friend, who was doubtful about Bordertown and its prince. Wendy shows everyone their way to the seats, and after a while, they are all done eating. The prince asks if the food was to their liking, to which Ash simply replies positively. Meanwhile, Tilly wipes her lips with her handkerchief and reminds the prince that, besides helping Bordertown fend off the demons, she's also here to retrieve their witches. Since a group of civilians will be coming to the Slumber Island from Silver Bay in the spring, she needs Lotus and Honey to help them with food and shelter. Hearing this, the prince reflects on the First Army, which is enough to handle the demons without needing witch help. However, he still needs Lotus and Honey's help for infrastructure building. The pier by the mountains isn't finished, and the docks are only halfway done, so they still need more houses. The prince asks if the departure could be delayed by half a month. Princess Tilly explains that under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have any objections, and would be fine with that. However, a type of fish monster has appeared in the southern seas, and she suspects it has something to do with the early months of demons. As the months go on, the strength of the demons will increase, so she'd prefer they leave earlier for everyone's safety. Sister Breeze will escort them by ship, as her abilities are perfect for dealing with demons that lack much intelligence. The prince then asks if, apart from Lotus and Honey, the other 3 witches can stay a little longer since their education is only halfway through, so it would be a waste for them to leave now. Tilly perks up at seeing her brother concerned for those witches, and she's now curious about how he plans to utilize Candle and Evelyn's abilities. The prince explains that he needs both of them for solidifying metal parts and brewing. You see, Candle can greatly increase machinery efficiency, while Evelyn's alcohol is very useful for many purposes beyond just consumption. His sister then explains that they have always felt insecure about the usefulness of their abilities, so she's glad to hear that he values them. She appreciates that the prince recognizes their abilities as crucial because she's always believed that no ability is ever useless. She then turns to the witches and asks for their thoughts on whether they want to leave. The little one says she's fine with either place, while Evelyn states that if Miss Tilly needs her back on Slumber Island, she'll gladly go. However, she wouldn't mind staying in Bordertown either, as she still has a lot to learn from Miss Scroll. Princess Tilly reassures her, saying she doesn't need to be so nervous and that they can choose whatever they want without feeling pressured. She explains that she just wants to know about everyone's experiences living in the town, and they can go back to Slumber Island or come to Bordertown at their own will. She would also love for other witches from Bordertown to visit Slumber Island as well. The prince agrees, saying he hopes that witches can freely live in both places with their combined efforts. Tilly perks up at her brother's pleasant thoughts and states that she's glad he feels the same way. Roland is startled for a moment to hear this, because the last time she called him brother was nearly a decade ago. But then he regains his composure and tells her that the day will come when they will live in harmony. He then decides to get back to the serious topic and mentions he's about to brief her on the ruins and the devils related to the Snowy Mountains and the stone towers he mentioned before. He explains that he was planning to send witches and First Army soldiers to the ruins in the Misty Forest for a rescue, but early winter delayed it. Tilly responds that she can't believe the legendary Devil Army could be so close, or that someone would still be in ruins that are 400 years old. She recalls the drawings of the devils he sent her, and thinks that this is what's most important right now. The prince points out that, based on the environment and their reactions, the devil territory has been there for many years. He suspects they haven't expanded into the kingdom due to the limitations of their red mist, so they're not a threat to Bordertown for now. He plans to build a scout tower to monitor their movements in the next couple of years. However, the sealed witch within the ruins is likely to reveal the truth behind Tequila and the fall of the church. Tilly agrees, but asks if there's any way to approach the ruins from the air instead of the land, as she's heard from Ash that Bordertown has a tool for aerial transportation. The prince quickly realizes she must be talking about hot air balloons. He explains that although a hot air balloon can hold 10 people, it can be modified for more. However, bringing the First Army soldiers through air would be impossible. If they encountered devils, they could suffer casualties, and with demons everywhere, it's just too risky. That's when Princess Tilly reminds him that it would have been fairly dangerous if he had gone with only the Witch Union. However, since she's here with other witches, it will be significantly safer. She explains that Shavi's barrier can block threats, and Ash can handle anything in close combat. The prince begins to think it over, and remembers that they were at a significant disadvantage in the air last time, but he can see the logic in what his sister is saying. Sylvie's magic sight can warn them of any dangers, and with Nightingale and Ash's powerful offensive abilities, even if things go wrong, Shavi and Anna can ensure everyone's safety. He then asks her if she's sure about going. Princess Tilly replies that she thinks this is a great opportunity to make sense of this mystery. Ever since the months came early and the demons appeared in the sea, she's had a bad feeling, and she's willing to go herself to uncover the truth. The scene then transitions to the Holy City. At the outskirts, we see knights guarding the walls, along with the 2 major archbishops. The old priest reminds Archbishop Maine that this winter is far too early, and there haven't been any records like this in the holy books either, and those were written by the Pope. Maine explains that while those books were written by the Pope, inaccuracies are unavoidable. They mostly track history in a general direction. Judging from the demons last year, he estimates they have about 10 years left to complete their goal. They plan to unify all 4 kingdoms in 2 years and grow the Divine Punishment Army in 8. By then, the Church's forces will be absolutely massive, and with Hermes' strong walls and strategic position, they'll protect this land until they make the enemy buckle. The old man sighs, saying he may be too old to witness this transition. He then asks about the snow powder recipe that Perov acquired and whether it has been tested yet. Maine explains that while the snow powder can be used for crowd control against demons, their true enemies are the devils. If they want to pierce through the devil's thick armor, they'll need to use a lot of explosives, and no one other than the Divine Punishment Army can throw such a massive amount of snow powder. The old man laments that there's no easy way to win against them. All they can do is confront them head-on. Suddenly, commotion erupts as people shout that 2 signals have been spotted, indicating multiple hybrid demons. They have no clue why there are so many since they're only in the first month of winter. Maine picks up his telescope and looks through it, while a soldier shouts that it's actually 3 signals, and the situation is even worse. Maine's eyes widen as he sees the sight before him. He recalls that the holy books have many records of reapers, nightmare beasts, and fanged devils. But what's mind-boggling is that these monsters, which were supposed to appear 5 years before the catastrophe, are showing up right now at Hermes. The scene transitions back to Border Town, where Honey and Lotus are about to depart for Slumber Island. They're thanking the prince for his hospitality over the past few months. The prince hands them a few gifts, saying this is just a small token of appreciation for their contributions to Border Town. The girls perk up in happiness, and Honey immediately starts to open her gift. However, Lotus reminds her that it's impolite to open gifts right away. When Honey finally unwraps it, she discovers a scarf and laments that she was expecting a bra instead. The prince explains that this is a scarf designed to protect her neck from the snow and cold, and if she wraps it a certain way, it can even cover her ears. Honey quickly puts it around her neck, and Lotus can feel the warmth radiating from it. Honey then notices there's something else inside the package and wonders if there's another gift. The prince encourages her to take it out, and when she does, she finds a shiny object that turns out to be a mirror. She gasps in surprise at how clearly she can see herself in it. Princess Tilly can't help but admit that this is a great place with running water and comfortable rooms. It's hard to believe that her brother transformed this desolate place into such a welcoming space. The prince asks if she regrets bringing the witches here, especially since everyone is enjoying living here more than Slumber Island. To which Tilly replies that she doesn't regret it at all if it means they can have better lives. She reminds him not to forget that she is a witch as well. The prince then asks if she's really going to join them on the trip to the Misty Forest ruins. He admits that while she is a transcendent, her abilities are not suited for combat. Tilly assures him that she can hold her own. To drive her point home, she takes out her red stone and demonstrates by shooting lightning from her hands. She proudly explains that this is a magic stone she found in some ancient ruins. The prince is quite amazed and asks if this means she can use 2 abilities at once. Tilly shakes her head with no. Apparently, the stones only allow 1 ability to be used at a time, and if she tries to channel magic through 2 stones at once, nothing will happen. She admits that she didn't want to reveal this to him so soon, but after their discussion last night, she realizes she may have been too harsh on him. But she now feels happy that he's being honest about the ruins. The prince just waves her off, saying there's nothing to worry about since he understands. Tilly then asks what Honey meant about a bra. The prince feels a bit sheepish and tells her to just ask Sylvie or Evelyn about it. Tilly looks puzzled, and wonders aloud why it seems like he's still keeping things a secret from her. As the witches experience flying in hot air balloons for the first time, the siblings talk about the mysteries and tensions between the church and ruins, and why the church is trying to hide the evidence of their existence. They realize that not only do the church records stop about 400 years ago, but they're also vague about the origins of God. There are no myths, epics, or titles aside from describing his omnipotence, and there are way fewer details than there are about the 3 gods of the Bay. Tilly points out that it feels like the church just sprang up out of nowhere in the kingdom. Later, when the prince is alone in his office, his mind is still occupied with these thoughts. He compares the church to the religions of his old world, where it's pretty much a given that deities are tied to the creation of the universe. Every religion claims their God created the world, with things like Genesis, karma, or some full record of creation being a staple in every belief system. Suddenly, Kyle Sitchy bursts into the room, revealing that he's got a lead on manufacturing acid. The prince perks up, excited by the news, and eagerly asks about the process. The mad scientist grins and says it's all thanks to Charles. Charles then starts explaining, but since we're not here for a science lesson, I'll spare you the details, especially since these shitty translations aren't accurate. One thing's for sure though, the acid they're producing is super pure, and it even gives off fumes like it was described in Chemistry 101. They go on about more of this technical stuff, but the prince lets us know that they're using one of the oldest manufacturing methods. The issue back then was that sulfuric acid couldn't be stored properly since there weren't containers that could handle the corrosion, so it got phased out. But that's no problem for the prince. In Border Town, they're already producing sulfuric acid slowly using nitric acid. As for the corrosion issue, Soraya's paint can handle it without a hitch. The prince gives them props for a job well done, admitting he can't believe they stumbled upon this method. Kyle Sitchy grins and shares that he's always had great luck, even back when they were in Redwater. He mentions how he managed to pull this off at barely 20 years old, much to the envy of the older folks in their 30s and 40s. The prince nods, stating that he'll assign some witches to help arrange the equipment. He also mentions wanting to scale things up. Now that they've got a reliable source of nitric acid, the next task is producing something very dangerous, which is nitroglycerin. He explains that this experiment will be dangerous since it can cause an explosion with a minor change in temperature, but he assures Sichi that he will send Anna over to take care of it. Sichi looks intrigued and fascinated, clearly excited about what they're about to experiment with. The prince can't help but grin, thinking about how 9 out of 10 chemists have a knack for explosions, so he is sure that a few explosions should not be a big deal for someone like Kyle. He knows that if nitroglycerin is combined with nitrocellulose or nitrostarch, it'll enhance its explosive properties. The former is a smokeless powder, while the latter is a rare, powerful explosive. The key to creating something incredible is already in his hands. Later we see witches just chilling and patrolling around the town. Andrea asks why everyone is working outside in the dead of the winter, and she is quite curious about what Roland did to make them brave the weather. Ash reminds her it's still late autumn, but Andrea argues it's pretty much winter already. As the usual argument starts between the two ladies, Sylvie steps in to calm everyone down. She explains that civilians typically avoid working in winter due to the effort and risks involved, but in Bordertown, food is cheap, firewood is abundant, and Miss Lily helps with illnesses, so they're willing to work for daily wages. Andrea gets it about the firewood but can't figure out why food is so cheap, pointing out that her family, in the food business, always saw prices spike during famines. Sylvie clarifies that in Bordertown, there's only one set price for food, and the prince ensures the buying price is higher than the selling price. Ash argues that it sounds like forced pricing, wondering why others can't set higher prices. Tilly steps in, explaining that processing and storage raise the cost of grains, making higher prices unavoidable. Sylvie agrees, adding that the prince uses extra funds to pay workers and expand production, but Ash sticks to her guns, arguing that it should be a free market. Sylvie says she's not so sure about that, but she's confident he's not setting crazy prices and that no one is starving. If the prices can stay stable, it'll benefit the people. Plus, it's not like farmers can just escape unfairness in a free market. They have to turn in most of their harvest, and if their shares price is too low, that could really hurt them. A locked price feels more fair, and more production means more income for everyone. Sylvie reminds them that farmers don't have to stay farmers forever. The prince promised that once their production hits a certain level, they can be promoted to citizenship. She explains that citizens only need to give up 20% of their harvest, and with the set prices, they'll be raking in a pretty good income. Now Tilly understands why the town is buzzing with life. She is fascinated how the legislation and the reward system were designed to encourage them. Suddenly an alarm blares and citizens start to panic. It's an alert for demons, and some of them decide to head to the wall to help the soldiers. Andrea feels fired up when she hears this. After all, they came here to show how witches really fight. When we reach the wall, we see Carter raising his eyebrow at how these demons never seem to get tired. They're always running wild every year, and even if they break through the town, it won't really do them any good. On the contrary, the other new soldiers are pumped up to flex their muscles. They think it'll be great practice, way cooler to shoot at demons than at a stationary dummy. Speaking of dummies, Carter has heard some interesting rumors about their artillery squadron. Other squads have mentioned that soldiers with consistent aim are being drafted into a precision team for a new mission. The soldiers shout at the mention of a precision team, and think that they just probably made this story up when they were getting bored. But Iron Axe reveals that the prince is planning to develop a new cannon for ships, which will let them attack other ships from a distance. Only the best marksmen will be commanding these cannons, and if anyone's interested in joining, they can put in a request through him. Alex, one of the leaders of this squadron, perks up at the news. He thinks to himself that this is clearly an opportunity to advance in the military. According to Iron Axe, warships might be named after soldiers who achieve significant accomplishments, and if a ship ever gets named after him, his life will have been worth it. He's also hoping these new kids get a chance to earn some valor as well, but right now, they're just too jumpy. They need to steady themselves. Besides, it would be ridiculous for a ship to be named Grapefruit or Broom. Suddenly, he shouts at his juniors to quit yapping and focus on the battlefield. As the monsters approach, he tells them to do their job and show the other squadrons that they're the best. The newcomers start shooting quickly, but their aim is so off that not a single bullet hits the monsters. Meanwhile, upon seeing the soldiers using those weapons, Andrea points out how these so-called firearms are supposed to be powerful, but they are useless if they can't hit their target. Ash explains that these soldiers used to be miners, farmers, and hunters, and they've only been using these weapons for about half a year. The princess excitedly asks Sylvie if she's familiar with firearms, to which the girl replies that she's observed them a few times. They seem like some sort of crossbow weapon. but the projectile is tiny and doesn't have a shaft or feathers. However, it doesn't seem to rely on the flexibility of a string to fire. Instead, it uses the impact from an explosion of some black powder to launch the projectile at high speed. It's probably some sort of alchemical product, but she has no idea what it's made of. Andrea then points out that this must be really expensive since alchemy has never been cheap. But judging by how they're using it, it's clear they're not being sparing at all. As the monster gets closer, the soldiers realize that their bullets are ineffective against its giant shell. That's when Andrea starts preparing to shoot an arrow, while thinking about how these so-called firearms have limited power. She knows that as long as she can get within 10 paces, even a city wall can't stop her magic arrows. But before she can act, the soldiers start firing their heavy artillery, and those massive bullets hit the monster directly, shattering its shell. The sight of such powerful firepower leaves Ash and Andrea completely blown away. After watching the firearms in action, Tilly returns to the castle with her witches, and their faces look like they just stepped out of a hentai story. Wendy welcomes them back, and Tilly takes her seat at the table. Wendy mentions that she heard they went to help the first army at the walls earlier. She then tells them they should try the town's special bird kiss mushroom skewers. It looks like Andrea's mind is still stuck processing the power of the firearm she just saw. When Wendy asks what's wrong and if the dish isn't to her taste, Ash quickly assures her to not worry about Andrea. Meanwhile, Andrea is replaying that moment in her mind over and over when that cannon took down the monster with a single hit. She's feeling utterly inadequate, realizing there's no way she could compete against that kind of firepower. On top of that, all the food stuffed with spices and sauces reeks of crudeness. In the Kingdom of Dawn, seasonings are often used to hide poor quality ingredients, and the more seasoning, the worse it tastes. But for some reason, she finds this dish frighteningly delicious. She can't quite figure out where in the border town they found such juicy mushrooms. She can tell that even this ordinary vegetable stew tastes like it was made with rich chicken ribs and seafood stock. And then there's this thing called ice cream cake, which is just a heavenly experience, and she can't get over it and craves bite after bite. Ash laughs and tells her to eat as much as she wants since they've got a rescue operation tomorrow. It'll be time for their wonderful Miss Andrea to truly shine. The next day, when they set off, people in the border town are amazed to see the balloon flying in the sky. Lightning waves to the soldiers as they depart for their mission, and Princess Tilly can't help but notice how popular Lightning is with the soldiers. Lightning just smiles, saying the prince always asks her to command them. Tilly, on the other hand, thinks to herself that there's no doubt Lightning is his daughter. Her ability to fly is perfect for her, and only the sky can satisfy her restless heart. Tilly knows Thunder wishes for Lightning to live a humble life, but his daughter is actually destined to be an explorer, maybe even surpassing Thunder himself. All Tilly wants is to protect her. One of the Slumber Island witches, Shavi, points out that this is the first time she's seen the western region blanketed in snow. Wendy asks if she's from around here, and Shavi responds positively, saying she used to live at Dragon Cliffs in the south, where it doesn't snow much. When she heard that Miss Tilly was recruiting witches at Slumber Island, she snuck onto a ship to Clearwater to join the others. Wendy then laments how the prince is always complaining that Border Town never gets witches, even though they openly advertise it as a haven, but it looks like Tilly beat him to it already. Shavi finds it amazing that they've been gathering witches as well. Ash confirms that Prince is indeed recruiting witches and remembers how one of his agents, Theo, approached her, and he quickly reconfigured her as one of the witches. She snickers as she recalls how he wasn't anything special, but he sure was a generous guy, and she definitely ate well during her trip to Bordertown because of him. Then Andrea throws a jab at Ash, saying that if it wasn't for Miss Tilly recruiting her, Ash would have already headed to Bordertown ages ago. Our tough girl gets mad at this, but Tilly quickly steps in to diffuse the tension, reminding them that it doesn't matter if it's Slumber Island or Bordertown. Every witch is their ally, so they better stop fighting. The two brute ladies reluctantly drop their argument, while Anna and Nightingale can't help but smile, satisfied to see Tilly's mature way of thinking. Now, speaking of Anna, Tilly can't help but reflect on her. As she looks back at her, she realizes it wouldn't be a stretch to say that her brother, Prince Roland, was heavily influenced by her. Just by observing Anna, Tilly can tell that her aura is calm and reserved, like a vast meadow, and she seems incredibly kind and reliable. She has also heard from Sylvie that Anna was one of the first witches to evolve her abilities in Bordertown, and that her magic is shockingly powerful. She even finished reading Natural Science 101 before anyone else. Tilly is sure that if she ever gets to discuss natural sciences with Anna by a cozy fire someday, it would be amazing. Suddenly, Maggie begins flapping around frantically. When Lightning asks what's going on, the little pigeon points out that the ruins are gone. This shocks Nightingale and the others, while Lightning claims it used to be right there. Princess Tilly is blown away to see such a huge hole and quickly tells Sylvie to check what's inside. As soon as Sylvie uses her abilities, she spots some sort of massive worm-like monster moving northwest. But then she gets shocked and exclaims that the ruins are in the worm's stomach. Sylvie further claims that she indeed saw the tower and the crystal coffin that was mentioned inside the monster's stomach. Tilly asks if there's anything else besides the worm, like devils. Sylvie responds that there were some, but they seem to be dead in its stomach. Princess Tilly then orders everyone to land immediately. She tells them to split into 2 teams. One will guard outside, while the other will go with her down into the hole. She makes it clear that they're going to kill the giant worm monster and retrieve the crystal. Once they land, Andrea and Nightingale remain on the ground, while Tilly, Ash, and all the other witches, including Anna, begin their descent down the hole. As Tilly reflects on the situation, she reveals to us that entering the hole will require witches capable of flight, which means dragging that crystal out is out of the question. If they can't wake the person stuck inside either, they'll have to cut the crystal open, and they'll definitely need Xavi's shield for that. On the other hand, Sylvie's magic eye is essential as well. Without her, they would struggle to locate the ruins in the worm's stomach. Anna's healing and slicing abilities are just as crucial. Thankfully, since Sylvie and Anna are both quite light, Maggie is able to carry them. Lastly, Tilly herself can also carry Ash, who can handle any combat situation. Every witch here is important, so losing even one of them would make this mission very difficult. The 2 left behind, Nightingale and Andrea, will guard the entrance in case of any demon attacks from the misty forest. With those 2 standing watch, their backs are covered. We also learn that Tilly has a solid backup plan in case they need to escape and ditch the rescue effort, though she still feels uneasy about it. She hasn't figured out why the worm only targeted these ruins while leaving everything else unscathed. It's also surprising that it's tunneling northwest, which is where the devil nest is located. Once they finally reach the end of the hole, they find another massive tunnel going west, left by the worm. Tilly tells everyone to light their torches, and everyone follows her instructions promptly. Sylvie then adds that she can sense the monster ahead, so they start walking forward into the saliva-filled tunnel. After walking for a while inside the tunnel, they finally reach the worm. The rotten smell coming from this disgusting monster burns every witch's nostril hairs. Ash decides to slice open the monster's stomach and be done with it before the smell starts messing with her head. But as soon as she grabs her sword to draw it, Tilly tells her to wait, explaining that they'll need Anna to kill it. She points out that since they don't know what's inside the stomach, slicing it open could be dangerous, so using swords is out of the question. Anna quickly raises her hand and shoots a green fire bullet that pierces the worm's thick skin and makes its way inside. That green fire bullet starts spinning around, crisscrossing in every direction. In no time, the monster is sliced like a perfect cucumber from every side, and blood begins to gush out. Once they see how easily Anna cut through the monster, their faces go blank, and they stare in awe at the true power and magnificence of her abilities. Sylvie quickly explains that the monster is dead since its heart has stopped beating. Ash is surprised that this monster even has a heart, to which Sylvie replies that it's near its head and about the size of their balloon's basket. It also got sliced up by Anna's flames, and magic is rippling throughout it. Seeing the magic, Lightning wonders if it's a hybrid demon. However, Tilly says they can't be sure, as historical records of the wastelands and demons are scarce. There's still so much they don't know, so she suggests grabbing the crystal and get going. As they enter the belly, Ash complains about the sticky mess, while Sylvie reports that all the rocks in here are crushed, making it impossible to tell what the tower used to look like. Lightning then mentions that there were so many glittering magic stones. She shows one of them, which resembles the crystal they're looking for. Right on cue, Ash finds the crystal after cutting through the flesh. With a few more slices, the giant crystal is finally revealed, and they see the witch trapped inside. Princess Tilly is left speechless as her eyes land on the magnificence of the stone. She quickly tells Anna that it's now her turn to work her magic. Anna quickly uses her fire laser once again, and the princess asks how it's going. Anna replies that it's a little hard, but she can cut it open. The crystal promptly begins to shatter, and the cracks expand around it until, eventually, the crystal blows up. Tilly is shocked to discover that there are 2 layers, with the inner part being the real crystal. Lightning tries to touch it and confirms that it's freezing to the touch. Anna then gives it her all, and finally manages to melt down the second layer as well, and out pops the witch who was stuck inside. Ash quickly takes her into her arms while Tilly asks if she's still alive. The brute lady confirms that she is, but it's very faint, and her heartbeat is still going, which is just barely alive. Even Tilly's mind can't help but wonder how she could survive in a frozen crystal like that. She's definitely a witch, but her name, origin, and why she was stuck in the ruins remain a mystery. She is eager to ask her all these daunting questions once they return. Meanwhile, outside the tunnel, the 2 blonde baddies stand on guard duty. Looks like Andrea is feeling bored and is already missing Tilly. She considers talking to Nightingale, but as an elite from the Kingdom of Dawn, She feels that elegance is a necessary quality for an unmarried woman, so she hesitates to approach her, especially since Nightingale is somewhat of a rival. She has heard that she matches Ash in terms of power and combat, but still, she finally decides that talking to a fellow witch is just a natural thing to do. However, before she can say anything, Nightingale suddenly vanishes from the scene, leaving Andrea startled. Right at that moment, she senses a heavy presence and turns around, but finds nothing. She wonders if it was Nightingale, but then she feels that there is more to that. She eventually summons her weapon, thinking there's an enemy nearby, and the enemy appears to be translucent. Just as she's about to make a move, a gunshot blares right by her left ear, and blood splatters in front of her. The creature that took the shot remains invisible. Once the monster is dead, it's finally visible now, which leaves Andrea shocked to see a praying mantis before her eyes. It was Nightingale who took it out, otherwise, she is pretty sure she would have been toast. Nightingale goes on to blast 2 more mantises, blowing their heads off. Wendy also comes rushing into the scene and asks what in the world are these things. Nightingale mentions that the creatures look like devils, if not demons, but their blood seems even more demonic. Andrea asks her since when she first noticed them creeping around. Nightingale replies that she spotted them the moment they first appeared. She explains that in her mist, their magic shines as brightly as a star, so it was easy for her to see them. Right at that moment, Sister Lightning flashes out of the tunnel, and Wendy lights up, relieved to see that they've made it back safely. Afterwards, they ride their balloon, and everyone gathers around this rescued witch in the balloon basket. Wendy can't believe that this witch was all alone in a place like that for decades. This just fuels her curiosity, and she wants to know what really happened to her. Princess Tilly then explains that she had a bad feeling inside, which is why she wanted to leave in a hurry. She asks if anything happened outside while they were inside. Nightingale explains that there were some weird hybrid demons, but they were dispatched immediately. Suddenly, Sylvie notices something below and exclaims in shock and asks, "What are those things crawling on the ground?" Andrea peers down and wonders if they're demons, but Tilly says she can't see anything except for a bunch of praying mantis corpses. Sylvie urges them to look closely, and they realize the corpses are completely torn apart, like something is eating them. Nightingale then glances down as well, and sees tons of creatures moving in their translucent forms. They are apparently demon monsters, and they are around 100, all rushing toward the hole. She suspects they might be after the dead worm's flesh, but shrugs it off, thinking it's not their problem anymore. However, it looks like Tilly isn't so sure about that. The scene cuts to the military grounds, where we see the new force, known as the police force. Knight Carter explains to every soldier that the police unit will be a part of the public security system. They will be peacekeepers within Prince Roland's territory, responsible for catching criminals, detecting unlawful activity, and maintaining order. They will also make sure to enforce the laws set by the Prince and City Hall, as well as help citizens in need. After a week of training, he imagines everyone will have a solid understanding of their duties. With that settled, he decides to lead them to their first mission and tells everyone to follow him. The group starts trailing Carter promptly, and among the soldiers, we spot a familiar face, someone who can hardly believe he passed Prince Roland's test and became a police officer after just a week of training. If you don't remember this guy, he's the one who was a refugee and exposed a City Hall official for selling free food in black to other refugees. Let's call him Redhead until we find out his name. The written assessment for this test had been the toughest task for him. He was given a scenario where he had to react cleverly to get out of a bad situation, but he nailed it. Now he's glad to finally have a stable income, and while he'll be assigned to the inner district, at least he can send some money to his old friend Kriegsman as well. Once they arrive at the docks, they see a ship that just came in, packed with refugees from the south and north. Knight Carter informs them that the prince has invited these people to Border Town to ensure their safety during this harsh winter. So the first task of the police unit is to organize the refugees into lines so they can pass through each station for virus testing and registration. Since the police unit is still a bit short-staffed, the First Army will also be there to support them. In the future, the police will handle this independently. We then see Prince Roland arriving at the docks with Theo and Hunter Iron Axe. The refugees are in awe as the prince personally comes to see them. After all, not many elites would bother to leave their heated homes and comfy beds during winter. Among the crowd, we spot a shady-looking refugee standing in the registration line, eyeing the prince with suspicious eyes. When his turn finally comes, he lies and says his name is Fursona, claiming to be an illiterate farmer from the north. The attendant at the table gives him the green light to move forward, but that's when Redhead steps in and starts grilling this so-called farmer about what month wheat should be planted during the winter. The attendant tells his fellow to let the man go, reminding him that their job is just to sort people out, and they don't have enough time for thorough investigations. But Redhead isn't letting this man off the hook easily, and continues to expose him, pointing out that even though this man claims to be a northerner, His accent sounds more like it's from the central region. So he asks this alleged farmer which town he belongs to in the north. Since Redhead is quite familiar with the northern region, he also notes that the guy's dress code doesn't fit either, because northern folks would at least wear gloves since the temperatures up there often dip below freezing. Right at that moment, the shady guy pulls a red church pill from his pouch. As soon as he pops it in his mouth, his shirt tatters as his muscles bulge out. Redhead is caught off guard, and this madman swings Redhead around like a trash bag before throwing him to the ground hard enough to make him cough up blood. The pill-infused maniac then launches himself toward the prince while poor Redhead struggles to stand. We then see that there are two other assassins also charging at the prince simultaneously. But before they can even touch him, a bullet tears through the head of the pill-infused man, and thanks to Prince's trusted allies, the three assassins are down for the count. Panic erupts among the refugees as they scatter in all directions. But Prince stands there resolutely, shouting for everyone to calm down. He declares himself the leader of the West, assuring them there's no reason to panic. He explains that the border town is offering shelter from the storm, along with food that will fill their stomachs and numerous job opportunities. He promises solid homes without a single crack and beds warmed by furnaces, as comfortable as sun-soaked meadows. He reassures them that by closing their windows, they won't feel the cold, even in thin clothes. He paints a vivid picture of their meals, porridge sprinkled with jerky, where each grain is visible in every spoonful, with one bowl enough to satisfy a person's hunger. Everyone is genuinely touched by his motivating pitch. They can't help but think how they had expected the prince to talk about citizenship and legalities, but instead, he's describing their benefits. The prince then adds that he longs for the day when every citizen won't have to worry about clothing, food, or shelter. However, their enemies crave the opposite, and these monsters were clearly sent by them. He reveals that their enemies want everyone dead, including him. He promises to increase security and ensure that no foes are hiding among the refugees for everyone's safety. As he finishes speaking, the crowd begins to cheer and praise the prince for everything he said and the care he is showing. Redhead manages to get back on his feet and can't help but point out how the prince completely stifled every trace of panic with just a few words. That's when Carter approaches him, giving him props for his keen eyes since he was the one who spotted the shady guy first. Later, Redhead is called to the prince's office, where the prince addresses him as Mr. Wade. Finally, now that we know his name, we don't have to call him Redhead anymore. The prince commends him for his astute observations and wonders if he was really just a normal citizen in the past. Wade reveals that he used to be part of the patrol in Golden Wheat City for about 6 years until the city was invaded by pirates. The prince then points out that his profile shows nothing special, and according to Carter's report, he should currently be living in temporary shelters. Prince finally catches on that Wade basically hid his true talents during registration, and he asks him why he did that. Redhead explains that the reason he's alive in Border Town is because of a former prisoner he met in Golden Wheat City named Kriegsman. That old guy saved him when times were dire. Since the old man is labeled a criminal, he can't be registered as a citizen, but he can't just leave his old friend behind in the Western District, especially since his friend is getting old and can't take care of himself. The prince asks if the reason Wade wanted to become a police officer was so he could work and protect his friend at the same time. Wade stutters before responding, but the prince tells him to cool it, as there is no crime thinking about anything. He then asks if Wade has any family. Redhead lowers his gaze and explains that his family died in Golden Wheat City. Roland then asks about Kriegsman. Redhead explains that he's all alone because the rat scapegoated him, which led to his imprisonment. The prince reminds him that anyone with specialized skills can rent a place in the city and enjoy the benefits of citizenship, including their families. He asks him if he understands what this means. Of course, the redhead quickly catches on to what Prince is trying to imply, so he starts jumping for joy when he realizes he can bring Kriegsman along. The prince tells him to bring his old friend to registration, and they'll take care of everything. Wade is so happy to hear this news that he literally starts slamming his head on the ground, bowing up and down frantically. Then the prince gets serious, warning him not to let his happiness cloud his judgment. He emphasizes that he should remain cautious, just like he was today. If he doesn't pass the subsequent tests, he'll still have to live in temporary shelters. Of course, Wade quickly agrees. Speaking of tests, Wade then remembers that there were a lot of questions on the written test that he didn't know how to answer, so he just wrote whatever came to mind. So he curiously asks why he got elected for the police unit. The prince smirks and says there was no right or wrong answer. Every answer depended on the person taking the test. It wasn't about getting things right, but more of a literacy test. As long as Wade could understand the question and write a legitimate answer, he passed. A little later, Knight Carter steps forward to remind the prince that they've received intel on the assassins. The prince tells him to go ahead and speak, and Carter explains that Barov has an apprentice named Salon, who was in charge of gathering refugees in the north. Since they ran out of boats on the way back, Salon contacted some of his friends at the capital to see if any merchant ships heading to the western region were available for rent. That's how the operation got leaked. The refugees stayed in Silver City, which is only half a day's distance from the capital, making it easy for Timothy to make arrangements. He further explains that while Timothy might not be sending armies from the capital, that doesn't mean he isn't trying to get revenge. Prince then reflects on the situation and feels somewhat relieved that the assassins only had pills and not explosives. If those guys had exploded in the middle of the crowd, all of their new workers collected over the past 2 months would have died. He highlights that, considering Salon's mistake came from inexperience, they'll keep the punishment light and cut 2 months' worth of his salary. This is the only way to make him aware of his grave mistake. He also tells Carter to keep a close eye on screening the refugees and to have Sylvie and Nightingale assist his team. They must ensure that no scouts or assassins escape and protect the lives of the refugees. Right at that moment, Lady Leaf bursts into the office, happily announcing that the balloon is back. Finally, the moment we've all been waiting for has arrived, and the balloon is here. We're about to hear all the juicy details about that mysterious witch. As soon as the balloon lands, Anna jumps out of the basket and immediately hugs the prince. He embraces her warmly, while the other 2 little girls also jump at the prince and surround him. His sister could not help but to notice how well his brother gets along with every single witch. The prince playfully asks if she wants a hug from her brother too. Tilly just smirks and says she'll pass, reminding him that the last time he tried to hug her, he threw her down on the ground. Finally, Ash steps out of the basket, holding the witch in her hand. As for the prince's first impression, he's just amazed, because the witch's outfit doesn't look cheap at all, and she looks like some rare character out of a gacha game. They fill him in that the witch is fine, but her magic is recovering at a very slow pace, so it'll take 3 or more days for her to get back to normal. The prince decides to call her the Slumberer for now. He announces that he'll open a room on the castle's 3rd floor for her, and the rest of them need to come to the lobby because he wants to hear all the details about what happened. Once they're in the office, Tilly explains everything in detail, and once she is done explaining everything, he admits to himself that he would be unsure of what to do in such a situation. He's impressed by Tilly's decisiveness in selecting the witches to form a perfect team. He then asks his sister if she believes that the massive worm might be related to devils. She responds that it's certainly not impossible since it had a completely different appearance, and it might have been another type of demon. This could mean they can compare devils to humans, while demons as hunting dogs. She believes some of these monsters follow the devil's commands and help them complete tasks. The prince kind of agrees with her assumption, but he's still not entirely sure. You see, if the devils are unable to dominate the continent because of the limits imposed by the Red Mist, then why don't they just harass the 4 kingdoms with demons year-round? Why do they always wait until winter? He also notes that the wolf-lion hybrids from last year were clearly more intelligent than the other demons. If intelligence can be gained through age, it will be just impossible for the devils to tame the other race. Tilly then adds that the enemies Nightingale encountered outside of the hole are more concerning because a demon that can conceal itself in daylight and move silently can breach any defenses. Their limited knowledge about demons makes this problematic, and they don't know how to deal with enemies like that at all. The prince agrees, and points out that if Nightingale hadn't witnessed it, he wouldn't be willing to believe in its existence. However, it seems these demons have never appeared in the western region before. Otherwise, a few of them would have reduced Longsong Fortress to ashes long ago. Tilly then mentions that the longer the months go on, the stronger the demons become, and this is a historically proven fact. She points out that it started snowing during autumn this year, which means their enemies will be extremely strong. The prince finds himself startled when he realizes that Tilly is actually considering his enemies as her own. This thought puts a smile on his face. He decides to assign Nightingale to watch the perimeter, and as long as Sylvie stays in the castle, she can keep an eye on the whole wall and alert the other witches as soon as she detects anything suspicious. Later, we see the prince and Lady Scroll walking down the corridor. Lady Scroll expresses concern about the new witch, and points out that until they confirm the identity of this new mysterious witch, they can't guarantee she isn't an enemy. The prince agrees, saying he knows, which is why he's temporarily placed a stone of divine judgment on her. Once they enter the room, they see Anna already inside. When the prince asks about the new witch, the girl explains that Nana and Lily both tried using their powers on her, but nothing worked, so all they can do now is wait. Even though she has been sealed for so long, there isn't a single scratch on her body, which is just incredible. She suspects it's probably similar to herself being impervious to fire, and this new witch's ability might be linked to ice. Roland then gives his most favorite girl a sweet pat on the head, commending her efforts for cutting open the coffin. Anna responds that it wasn't just her. She explains that this witch was very clever in how she encased herself, and must be quite powerful. She reveals that the witch first froze all her internal bodily cycles with extremely cold ice, then used normal ice to seal the cold ice inside her so it wouldn't melt easily. When she cut open the outer layer, the coffin broke instantly, which makes Anna believe that the new witch must have placed certain cracks there on purpose. She can tell that this lady had been waiting for this day, and she's sure that she will definitely wake up. The scene then transitions into the witch's memories, where we see a knight desperately trying to convince her that the wall has been breached and the allied armies can't hold on for much longer, so they have to go. But the lady just tells him to let go of her, insisting that she can fight as well. That's when a giant monster appears, stomping on every human in sight. It's so huge that there are literally 3 devils riding its back, and other devils are wreaking havoc on the ground. Even with all the chaos around her, the icy witch remains stubborn. While the man continues trying to convince her to leave, the witch makes it clear that as a member of the Holy City's witches, her death will also be on the battlefield. But her expression drops when she spots something unexpected in the sky. It turns out to be another witch crashing down with her heavy sword, and she's apparently the divine warrior of the Alliance, the extraordinary Transcendent. This lady has fire in her soul, and as soon as she lands, she literally blows away a bunch of devils like they're just trash bags. Her landing is so badass that it obliterates the ground beneath her from the force. She then tells everyone to go, claiming that she will be fine and urges them to leave while they still have the chance. The soldiers argue that they have nothing left to fight for since this is the last holy city, and yet they haven't been able to stop the devils. The icy witch finally begins to tear up, realizing they've actually lost tens of thousands of people and soldiers. They've played every card up their sleeve, but they're still on the losing side. But this badass lady states they shouldn't give up. There's still hope. She raises her sword, trying to lift everyone's spirits, and orders them to cross the mountains and rivers to the wastelands. She tells them they can rebuild order, and their survival will lead to victory. All of the citizens begin to retreat, but the icy witch still has doubts about whether they can actually rebuild order. She feels hopeless, and the reason for her hopelessness is because even their most prosperous holy city, built on the most fertile lands, has fallen like a child's sandcastle in a flash, leaving panic and chaos enveloping everyone. She wonders if escaping is really enough to avoid the devils. But then Alice's words start to reverberate in her mind, and she begins to believe that as long as they survive, they will eventually reach victory one day. I think that lady with the giant sword must have been Alice. Regardless, she believes that the magic stones and documents she has stored in the Misty Ferret research facility will be crucial for their task. That's why she grits her teeth for now and presses forward, because passing this knowledge to the next generation is the only hope for humanity's survival. She also reveals that there's a popular belief in the Holy City that witches are chosen by the gods, while mortals who can't wield magic are merely their stepping stones. However, the mortals, whose shields are filled with courage and tenacity, possess certain qualities that the witches lack. With the mortal soldiers sacrificing themselves, she is now even more determined not to die here. She knows she must ensure the safety of the data and findings. She crosses the mountains and rivers while the devils continue chasing her. When she finally reaches the Misty Forest Research Lab, she finds the same magic stone. She grabs it and decides to pass along the message. But just at that moment, the devils break into the room. One of them throws a spear with godly speed, but she quickly uses her icy powers to shield herself inside an ice barrier. Alone inside the ice, she isn't sure if she's dead or alive. Suddenly, a bright light begins to shimmer, and the veil of darkness lifts as she opens her eyes in the real world. Wendy and Anna perk up when they see this and shout to the Highness that the lady is awake. The icy witch hears this and wonders why they are using such an outdated, ancient title to address someone. It seems like this lady might actually be from a more advanced era, but who knows? We will have to wait to find out. They quickly gather around her, and the prince asks how she feels. But the first question the lady asks is where she is. The prince reveals that she's in Border Town in the western region of the Grey Castle Kingdom, and that he is the 4th Prince of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. He introduces all the ladies as members of the Witch Association and then asks her if she remembers anything. The lady feels completely overwhelmed hearing all of this. It's the last thing she expected. Unknown locations, unknown time periods, and unfamiliar people. She has no idea what this Witch Association is, but she's at least relieved that she is among witches, who are her own kind. She's also confused by this title of prince, and thinks to herself that it's something from the First Divine War, from ages ago. Her mind spins as she realizes that she might have returned to a time before the war. She wonders if the gods have given her a second chance to prepare and save the holy city, but that thought feels utterly ridiculous. Anna can tell that this lady's mind is going haywire with thoughts, and the prince agrees. But just then, the icy witch abruptly sits up and bombards them with questions. She asks if they saved her, if the devils are gone, whether they won the war, and what happened to Tequila City. The prince takes a moment to gather his nerves after getting startled by her abrupt questions, and then promptly tells her that he found her in the basement of a stone tower. The icy witch then quickly flings Wendy's hand away, while our girl was just merely trying to assure her. She looks arrogant and thinks to herself that she usually doesn't care about status, but she feels quite patronized to be interrogated by someone of a lower class. If they were talking to Alice this casually, there would be severe consequences for such behavior. She pushes her arrogance aside and finally introduces herself as Agatha, a witch from the Tequila Research Guild. She then points out that since it's been 450 years, could it be that humans have been fighting devils for that long? Prince explains that she has been asleep for a very long time, so things might be different from what she remembers. If she feels fine, they can explain everything to her slowly. Agatha says she's willing to listen. With that, Prince explains everything to her and reminds her once again that they are currently in Bordertown, which is in the western region of Grey Castle, one of the 4 great kingdoms. The witch finds this absurd and claims that the 4 kingdoms he speaks of are nothing but wasteland and have no value for development. She adds that the concept of kings and elites is an archaic construct that disappeared with the First Divine War. She finds it ridiculous that witches are being hunted by mortals and asks who would dare do such a thing. She then quickly tries to use her magic powers, but nothing happens. Pulling the sheets over, she notices a divine stone of judgment resting on her feet and starts freaking out to see this, calling everyone crazy here. She then calls out to the other witches, questioning why they are helping a mortal defend against a high-tier transcendent. She reminds them that using any of these stones is highly illegal according to the law of the Alliance. Prince facepalms himself because he already had expected it to happen, but Wendy reassures him that she'll handle it. She steps closer to the newcomer, introduces herself as Wendy, and tells her that things are not as she claims, and what Prince mentioned is actually true. Wendy admits that she doesn't know much about her life in Tequila City all those centuries ago, but she tells Agatha that today, Tequila doesn't exist anymore, and the alliance she mentioned is gone too. She explains that she and the other witches have been living in hiding until they met Prince Roland, who provided them with a stable shelter and encouraged them to use their powers to help make the world a better place. Wendy then narrates how this world is prejudiced against witches, with divine judgment stones everywhere. In this society, witches are treated like nothing more than mortals. Agatha then also tells her side of the story, revealing that the Alliance was a large organization created by the leaders of multiple witch kingdoms. It consisted of many high-tier witches and transcendent beings. To win the Divine War, they built massive armies, ruled numerous holy cities, and nurtured new witches, settling conflicts and maintaining peace and order. She's baffled by how such a powerful group could just disappear without a trace. She wonders what happened to Master Alice and the survivors who were supposed to rebuild. She desperately wants to know where they are now. Right at that moment, Wendy brings over a cup of tea, and surprisingly, Agatha takes it without making a fuss. In reality, she's hoping to get the Divine Judgment Stone off her, and gaining the trust of the others seems like the only way to do it. But as far as they've told her, she wants to see the truth for herself before believing any of it. Agatha then explains again that she's from the Tequila Research Guild, and that in the 5th year of the Divine War, Tequila was the last holy city to fall. Many people escaped, but she returned to the Misty Forest to collect some things she had left behind. Prince asks if she actually fought the devils, to which she agrees, and she looks a bit annoyed, reminding them who else was supposed to fight them since mortals can't do squat against them. Prince quickly asks if she's a witch from the church, but Agatha says she's never heard of this church he speaks of. She mentions that all the holy cities were built by witches, and that their citizens included both witches and mortals. Mortals handled childcare and reproduction, and when a child awakened their powers, they were sent to specific organizations for training. Of course, combat witches would join the alliance to fight off the devils. Lady Scroll then finally brings up the book Lady Kara had, and she asks her if she can read this. As soon as Agatha takes a look, she confirms that this is a witch's diary. Wendy asks about the mysterious language, and Agatha explains that it was created to be separate from mortal language, so they couldn't participate in higher-level matters. She states that these writings require magic to read, so she can teach any witch how to read it. That's when Prince, with his endless wisdom, chimes in. He points out that writing is meant to be a tool for communication, and its usefulness lies in its accessibility. He says it's quite foolish to exclude mortals from her inner circle because, in reality, mortals can take on many different jobs and positions with the right education and training. They're not inferior, even if they don't have magic. Agatha reflects that while she doesn't mind working with mortals, she dislikes it when they act like they're in charge. Even her family's head servant was more polite than this prince. Then, Sister Scroll asks her if she's heard the name Alice. The mention of that name startles Agatha, and she asks where they heard it, and further asks if knowledge from 450 years ago is still around. Sister Scroll explains that they found this book in the Eastern Forest, and Alice's name was written on the last page in mortal language. Agatha then explains that Alice is the Queen of Comet City, one of the 3 leaders of the Alliance. She's an extraordinarily transcendent being, meaning she's even above the transcendent level, and she's the strongest witch in the Alliance. Agatha isn't surprised that no one here knows about these transcendent witches, especially since this knowledge has been lost over time. She explains that there's really no limit to a witch's powers. With enough time, practice, and experience, very few witches are lucky enough to evolve their abilities into something incredible. This is called a superior awakening, and there's no cap on it. The growth is not always concrete or predictable. Speaking of awakening, Prince recalls that they have 4 witches who have achieved it. This shocks Agatha, as it's something unbelievable, and she asks how many witches the Union have in total. Wendy responds that there are only 10, and this revelation further boggles Agatha even more. It sounds utterly ridiculous to her that 4 out of 10 witches have awakened. She then tries to explain that witches who evolve their powers are no joke. They're the ones chosen by the gods and things like that. That's when Prince hints for Anna to step forward. As she does, ready to demonstrate her abilities, Agatha can't help but think that Anna looks pretty young and shouldn't have enough experience or knowledge to be an awakened witch. At first, Anna displays her firepower, and Agatha confirms that it's a flame ability, which is pretty common. However, Prince tells her there's more to it since this is just the ability Anna started with. Then, Anna shows the second stage of her abilities by solidifying her flames. As she forms a cube out of the fire, Agatha is officially blown away. Meanwhile, Prince casually asks her if this can count as a higher tier awakening. Agatha reflects on how the Holy City is gone and the Alliance is destroyed. Witch powers should be declining as a result of zero training and guidance, so a young witch's awakening twice isn't something that can be explained by luck. She also feels kind of jealous and awe, remembering that she ascended at 26 and was considered a prodigy. Hearing this guy say he has 3 others like Anna makes her feel out of the loop. She can't help but think about how lucky he is. It's like he's the gotcha god with so many SSR witches. It's just unbelievable. Eventually, she gives in and agrees that Anna's abilities do count. She also recognizes Prince's status as Highness and asks at what age Anna awakened. Prince is a bit startled for a moment that she's addressing him by his title, but then he starts patting his favorite girl and says that Anna's first awakening happened when she used her magic to defend against demons, and the second was a result of her education. Of course, Agatha is bewildered and asks what kind of education he's talking about. Prince gets all chummy and excited, saying they'll talk about that later. But first, he asks her what Alice's divine punishment trials were. She then explains that Alice was extremely powerful. Once she wore a stone of divine punishment, no criminal could rival her abilities. However, the number of extraordinary transcendent beings was too small, so they lost out on a variety of witch powers. According to the Alliance data, there was always 1 combat-oriented witch after every 10 witches, and the same ratio applied to transcendent witches as well. Among those low numbers of combat witches, there wasn't any telling how many could ascend. The Alliance even had a 50-year period when not a single witch ascended, which made their combat power pretty inconsistent. Prince quickly catches on that not all mortals could become witches. Not all witches were fighters, and even among combat witches, not all were strong. Agatha agrees, revealing that while the Alliance created a military of mortals, even armed with stones of divine punishment, they were no match for the terrifying devils. In these desperate times, Alice ordered the entire scholarly guild to research how to push human warriors to their absolute limits. Agatha believes that Alice succeeded in something significant after her experiments, and she left all those messy notes in this diary. When Prince asks if she wasn't part of the guild during that time, Agatha explains that she left after Alice gave that order. Instead, she built her own research facility in the Misty Forest. Alice quickly found the right direction, using stones of divine punishment to combine the powers of both mortals and witches. However, this process required the sacrifice of witches' lives, something Agatha could never accept. She believed that Alice should have focused more on unlocking the stone's properties, rather than treating witches as expendable resources in a desperate bid for power. Both Prince and Tilly are shocked to hear about this sacrifice thing. Agatha mentions that Alice had no choice but to stoop that low since tequila was at stake. However, with the Alliance gone, it's likely that this method didn't survive and probably won't appear in the future. That's when Prince reveals that the Divine Punishment Army still exists. This revelation comes as a great shock to her, while Prince further explains that the church she's never heard of is the organization that built 2 holy cities in the mountains. They were the ones who started hunting witches. They even adopt orphans and children in poverty to raise in their nunneries. Wendy escaped from one of those places. The church has its own army and territory, and most of their most powerful warriors are part of the Divine Punishment Army. These senseless monsters possess immense strength that rivals transcendent witches, and their numbers are always growing. It wouldn't be a stretch to think that the church also has a division of powerful witches. This is the only reason, he explains, that they had to put the Stone of Divine Judgment on her, because they can't be sure if she works for the church. He explains that if it were not for her clarification, They thought the church had built the city of Tequila in the wastelands, and that the ruins belonged to them too. Agatha, on the other hand, is shocked that some mortal faction stole Alice's secrets and is now hunting witches to create a divine punishment army for their own dominance. Wendy then tells her to stop worrying and suggests she take a good night's sleep. Hopefully they'll find the truth slowly. After that, they decide to leave. But before going, Prince tells Agatha she was wrong about one thing, which is that mortals can slay devils too. And when he says this, he means every word of it. Later that night, while Prince is working, he asks Nightingale how Agatha is doing. Our snack-addicted girl replies that Agatha is asleep and had a bowl of porridge earlier, so her appetite is fine. Sylvie is also keeping watch over her. He then tells her he's already taken the stone off Agatha and tells her to figure out the truth of Agatha's claims when she wakes up tomorrow. She asks if he actually believes her, and he replies that he thinks most of what she said is true. Agatha uses the same writing and language as people today, so even though there's a mountain range from where she is, it suggests these two regions used to be closely connected. He's not sure what went down 400 years ago, but he points out that most of the cities were built around 200 to 300 years ago, and that's when strongholds started popping up. He's always been curious about how astrologers and alchemists knew so much without any records of their experiments. Now, it clicks for him that the survivors of the Alliance probably escaped to this region, bringing their language and civilization with them. They must have helped these folks build their governments, fortresses, and cities along the way. Nightingale asks why he's so confident about this. She jokes that if he's wrong, he'll owe her a deluxe lunch tomorrow. Prince playfully counters as well, asking what happens if she's wrong. She smirks in response, and says she'll give him whatever he wants. He then gets back to his studies, noting that he still has a lot to organize since Agatha's information is so vast. Nightingale points out that Agatha is arrogant and doesn't really like him, which Prince can totally see. After all, Agatha lived in a world where witches were way above mortals, so in her eyes, he probably looks like just some weeds by the roadside. She then asks him if he doesn't hate her, and he shakes his head, saying no. He explains that she's just a victim who was abandoned by time. Imagine sleeping in an ice coffin for 400 years and waking up to find the world completely different. That kind of unfamiliar fear would raise anyone's defenses. He's sure that once she comes to terms with reality, she'll change her beliefs too. Nightingale acknowledges this and claims that she already knew he was going to say something like that. But she reassures him that she won't let Agatha insult him in any way. Well, that's a wrap for this video. Let me know what you think. Do you prefer me to keep narrating the story in detail, or should I just start skimming through the stuff to catch up faster? Let me know in the comments below.